lines. There's an exit through the church lounge, another one through the kitchen.
I think we live at a time where it gets harder and harder to have civilized disagreement. And we actually need to raise the standards of discussion to keep our democracy strong, and it needs to be strong because, like all countries, we've got a bunch of issues to digest and work through. And I want to see that happen in a civilized way with civilized discussion, not people rioting and attacking statues and so on. So part of what I've done over the last few years is that we've had some incredible guests. We've had the former Reserve Bank Governor, the current Reserve Bank Governor, the Mayor, we've had the American Ambassador, the British High Commissioner, we've had all sorts of people come along and speak. And they've been fabulous events, they've been highly engaging, we've had great crowds, the crowds are growing all the way through. I think today we've actually got some more people in an overflow room that's how popular they've got. But there was one thing that occurred to me, is that as I've got around the country increasingly in my role as a party leader, I've noticed this enormous divide between urban and rural. And I was thinking about my own background, not a lot, but just a little bit. And you know, my parents, stand on. Well, welcome everybody. But my parents were born in Fielding and Te Kaupuru, which, for those who don't know, is just Te Kaupuru is so remote. You explain that it's outside of Darga. My four grandparents lived weren't farmers, but lived in very rural environments. 2 generations later, I represent the most densely populated, but not the most dense, in the country. And you know, I'm someone who doesn't even know how to cook food, let alone grow it. And all through the lockdown, I thought maybe I was losing weight, a couple of kilograms a week. I thought the Labour Party was trying to starve me to death. They were trying everything else. But there's a serious point to this and a serious problem, which is that Katie represents what is still the backbone of our economy. And have we learned that through the last 2 or 3 months? And increasingly, governments are elected by people that have very little understanding of what it takes to actually produce food. And the rural community, I think it's fair to say, is felt under attack. They're used as a political football every election. You know, I was just talking to some farmers. They were telling me that their own daughter was made to write an essay at the school about why her parents were destroying the environment. Child abuse. And so we've got to, in the spirit of having a civilized conversation and democracy, we've got to start bringing people together on some of these issues. For one thing, give farmers credit for a lot of the environmental work that they do. But anyway, that's enough about me. Katie is extraordinary and extraordinarily generous. She's not a Wellington lobbyist or person that's paid to schmooze politicians by an interest group. She's a real farmer. She grew up on sheep and beef. She has now, with her husband, a dairy farm on the west coast. She drove through the Southern Alps last night to Christchurch because She was worried with the snow she might get cut off. And then she got on a plane this morning, flew up here to Auckland, came and spoke to a group of people at a lunch, and now she's here to talk again. And then tonight she's got to fly back to Christchurch and go back to the West Coast. So we're so grateful for you making the effort to be with us, Katie. And I can tell you from our discussion at lunch, it's going to be a very high quality discussion here. Katie is, of course, the president of Federated Farmers, and the Feds are very ahead of their time organisation. It's only taken 118 years to appoint a female president, and I think they were waiting because they knew what a high quality leader Katie would be. Katie is a very successful farmer in her own right, having won national awards for achievements in dairy farming. And she's been a very effective voice, a very intelligent voice, not a combative voice, but a very effective and intelligent voice for the interests of rural New Zealand in her tenure as the president. And unfortunately, this is actually her last week as president. So she's going to be replaced, and we're going to get the benefit of a whole year or whole 10 years' time as the president of Fed. Anyhow, I kind of feel like I've monopolised this opportunity as much as I can get away with. So it's my great pleasure to welcome Katie Milne, President of Federated Farmers. You're amongst friends here in the Epsom electorate. We're very grateful to have you. Thank you.
Wow, what an introduction. Thank you very much, David, for inviting me the opportunity to speak to another urban audience. I do enjoy getting the opportunity to speak to people, my urban cousins, and I've done so in Canterbury and in Wellington, and not so much up here, but really appreciate the opportunity. So I'm a West Coast farmer, and as David said, my heritage is actually, I'm a fifth generation West Coast farmer, and my family still farms south of the glaciers in the Maitai and the Paringa Valley, Bruce Bay area. And so that's sheep and beef, mainly beef, and riverbed, broadacre riverbed runs. And, so it's stock whips and horses and, now with modern technology, a few helicopters and a few motorbikes at times to help do musters, but generally it's still on horseback. And, they upset a few whitebaiters at times because a herd of cattle will decide to swim from one flat to another and go through the river. And it's very, very, very low impact, very low density type style of farming. So I'm in where I live now. I'm in area. It's a bit weird. Thank you. Lake Brunner area, and so that's mid West Coast, and it's a sensitive catchment, and we've done a lot of work in that catchment around water quality and so on. My background, I've actually been a meat inspector and worked in the freezing works. Was my very first job. So it was a good job, the first one. I did some microbiology there, and I also was a grader and did quality control. So, and later on I went back and became a meat inspector. So it's been very useful to understand a bit of the meat industry as well in my role and how some of that works. We did spend a couple of years living in Canada on grain farms and ranches there. After I met my partner, and that was really interesting too. 2 years in that environment, completely different to New Zealand context, with arable farmers and ranchers. And that was because we actually went through a bit of a hard time when we were young share milkers. We got a thing, it was 1988, so it was a big El Nino year where we had 6 metres of rainfall, which we've just had last year as well, by the way.
Can you bring it up here?
Yeah, we hogged it, sorry. Which is really tough to farm your way through. It's not easy to, normally our average rainfall is 3.5 metres. I know in Canterbury they're about 800 mils. So, it just shows you the variety that New Zealand has that our pastoral farmers and others face. But so it was so blimmin' wet, we were pretty defeated. And at the same time, we got a little liver fluke bug got to the west coast and got into our dairy herd, and so they weren't functioning very well, and it was all a bit dramatic for us, and we didn't cope very well. And we said, actually, is farming what we want to do? Can we cope with this? And so we decided to have a furlough, if you like, and go overseas. And we worked on farms there, but different type. Did that for 2 years. Decided we had to either get residency there and stay, or come home and get back into farming in New Zealand. And the call for home was too strong. And we came home and bought the farm in the right way, not the other way. So yeah, that's a little bit of my background story, I guess. And I got into Feds early on. We bought the farm. RMA had just come in, and I went along to a meeting there, and there was a room full of what's a current term we all hear now. Sorry to say it. Pale male and stale men in the room, and I was 22-year-old female. My hair colour matched because I had white, short, spiky hair then. I was quite trendy, and didn't feel out of place. But a couple of those fellas said, actually, if you're smart enough to turn up at this meeting, or dumb enough to find out about the RMA, as it was at the time, we'll hang on to you and keep you going through the system, because you're obviously interested enough and curious enough to want to understand what's going to drive your farm going forward. And also at the same time, I was thinking, actually, yeah, you guys are all getting on, and some of the pushback and some of the things I was saying, while it was wise and it was right for the time, it wasn't necessarily going to be right for going forward. So I thought the only way to have my say and have an input into what's going on and what's going to be my farming future is to be involved and be in those conversations and know what's going on. So I stuck. And I as someone asked me before how I got into it and got to this level, I sort of swam my way to the top somehow by default, never deliberately setting out to do that, but just as I've got there. There's a whole other range of things that on the way was lucky enough to do, which people pushed me to put my name in the hat for a couple of things. And one of them was Dairy Woman of the Year, and in that same year it was Rural Woman of Influence that Westpac run, and I lucked out and won them. But someone had tried to get me to do it before, put my hand up, and I had said no, I'm not interested. But they said no, but you should, because it shows other people, other women especially, what you can do. You know, just even by being involved in it, that you should, you know, encourage people to step up. So I did, and it was a great experience actually, and I won them both. And I think that helped to set my way forward to stepping up into this role. A little bit more recognition and a little bit more knowledge and people you meet and networks and all those things. And it was great to be able to represent and mentor other younger ladies coming through, because they were quite right, those people who said, put your name forward, don't be shy, because it's not just about you and being not wanting to like being too modest. You actually need to mentor and show other people that getting involved is important and that they should do it. So anyway, sort of really enough about me personally, but my goals when I got to this level at Feds, it's been pretty simple. It's to remind people that farmers grow their food, and it's just as simple as that. And they do it to the best of their ability with the current tools and technology and resources that are available. And after I won the Dairy Woman of the Year, there was a scholarship that went with it, and I had to come up to Auckland once a month for 3 to 4 days for 12 months to do the Breakthrough Leaders course that Global Women run. There was 38 women on that course. I was the only South Islander, and I was the only farmer. And so that was a great platform for me to be able to have governance discussions and learnings and be exposed to a whole lot of other stuff. But I could put context around some of those discussions with a rural bent and a rural flavour. And at the end of that time, when we had our celebrations and so on that we'd passed, a couple of the women said to me, you know what, when I hear about farming on the radio now or on the TV, I think about food. You did that. And I was so proud of actually the fact that my messaging had got through to a few people who are very urban, that, you know, farming, we are just growing food. It's pretty basic. and it's important, and it enables everyone to do what they want to do because they don't have to worry about feeding their family. One of the other first things I did in that context was I changed the signature on the bottom of my new title as president, and it says farmers feed families. So anyone who gets an email from me, unless it comes off my phone, you get that nice little message. But yeah, that's been one of my things that I've set out to do, just to remind people that all we're doing is growing food. So in that role, been continuing to strive for a fair deal for farmers by making sure their voice is heard when policy is being formed, and that's what Fed's role really is that there's farmers in a room, in the halls of power, trying to get people to understand a little bit about what the implications will be of some of the policy they put through, because it's not easy with the disconnect between urban and rural. We know that food production, people are 9 generations away from having to produce their own food in London. It's only 3 generations in New Zealand that you can find that people haven't had to grow their own food. But it's also overseas in the likes of London and Europe. It's 3 generations from people. You can go to London and talk to someone and they won't even know someone or won't even have a friend who knows someone who's a farmer. 3 generations. That's where the disconnect is always going to grow, and socially it's a construct that we can't change. So another one of my goals is that at least what we can try to do is make sure that those in New Zealand, in a New Zealand context, people trust us to grow their food. They're not going to understand all about farming, but at least if they can learn to trust us, again, that's a great thing. So this role has taken me around right around the country and to other parts of the world. And the thing that strikes me the most is that the challenges for rural people are the same wherever you are in the world, except you're either in a developed nation or an undeveloped nation. And so principally they're exactly the same. They struggle to have good water, enough water at the right time to grow crops consistently. And there's challenges with people outside of farming setting the agenda and setting rules around food systems and chemicals, drugs you can use, and climate change, and a whole lot of policy settings. And often they're doing it without any input from farmers, and that's a real worry for us. So I've been lucky enough to be part of World Farming Organisation. I represent Oceania farmers in that, and that talks to the UN about different topics, and has finally got a seat at the table on a lot of these discussions that are going on, that it's so critically important that the farmers are represented. The people who have their hands on the plough and the ability to do something different are in those conversations. So there's been some really great opportunities that have come out of this role. But the public lack of knowledge around food and where it comes from and how hard it is to grow, it is a problem. And it gets wrapped up into perceptions of others. And many of them have agendas, and they're not honest about their agendas. And they form an argument about one particular piece of an issue around farming because they're working to another agenda they want, and they think that this method will get them there. And I do think that plant-based protein, that's sort of pushed as a big answer to removing livestock out of the system, because livestock are deemed to be demons when it comes to greenhouse gases. Well, they're not. All forms of food production has nutrient loss and greenhouse gas emissions, and there's just people are pushing certain agendas for their own gain. And there's issues with that nutritionally, because animal protein is so important for diet for the first 1,000 days of life, especially, so that people get developed properly, children develop properly, and they don't have stunting and things like that. But it gets lost in the perception of others when they strike on these tiny little slithers of information they want to put out there, and it's really tough. Irrigation gets slammed, and it's made an incredible difference to parts of New Zealand and other parts of the world where they've been able to irrigate and make land productive. And I know there's issues around some of it, and when I did this discussion like this in Canterbury and in Christchurch, and talking about, you know, the way the Canterbury Plains were, and they had these marvellous shelter belts everywhere, and the landscape is so different now because there's pivot irrigators that go around. But farmers were driven there through doing precision irrigation, so they could utilise the water really effectively. It was important that they went to more, you know, modern technology that allowed them to do that really well. And the bit that people don't know, I mean, it's made a massive difference to Ashburton and Invercargill and places like that where dairy did come in, and the productivity of those communities has bloomed. Ashburton was a dying town years ago, and I was a kid going through there, and now it is absolutely thriving. It's made a massive difference. But a piece that people don't get around that story of irrigation coming into Canterbury is the heartache that those farmers, because that area, you know, I'm a fifth generation farmer, but they've got farmers there that go back a lot longer than that. You know, you've got first four ship guys down there, and they'll tell you as well, by the way, that they're off one of the first four ships. First thing when you won't go into a room, what ship? What school? What ship? Yeah. No, none of that. But actually, probably one of my rallies was probably boiling the billy for yours. But anyway, it's a different story. But they have struggled. You know, I've sat down and talked to a couple of them about it. You know, when they've bitten the bullet and gone, I have to convert to dairy because sheep and beef are not cutting the mustard. They had 20 years of not enough income from sheep farming. That's why dairy went south. That's why farms converted to dairy, because it could make money, and they were struggling to get by with sheep. And that's the only reason why it's changed, because you can make money out of one and not the other. It's improved a bit at the moment for meat. But back to the story about how much anguish these guys have gone through when they're getting the pivot irrigators put in. Talking to a couple of them, and they said, yeah, my great-grandfather or great-great-grandfather planted those trees, and I've got the job of cutting them down. And they've got an emotional attachment to that stuff. And one of them said, it took me 4 days. I sat there with the whiskey bottle on the table every night, bawling my eyes out. And this is a guy that, you know, I won't say his name because he'd be like, you couldn't tell that story, you can't do that. But it just shows you the depth of the roots and the having to face something, do that. They know why their grandparents and great-grandparents planted those trees. It was for shelter, and it was to help stop the nor'wester sucking all the moisture out of the land and shifting the soil. And it was important. But you know what? They've done that. And they were macrocarpa and pine, so they're actually only good for magpies and sparrows as far as New Zealand biodiversity goes. So now, with the centre pivots, they are changing the way things look. It's green now. When you drive through Canterbury in summer, you don't get that horrible bloody dust all through your car because it's all just blowing away from the rain on the west coast, the nor'wester. But it's also, they're able to plant these, and they're coming away. They're not everywhere. You can't see them everywhere yet, but they're planting these corridors of natives because they're getting watered regularly now. So you've got green grass. Yes, you've got cows, but you're actually getting these corridors of New Zealand biodiversity, and the birds are coming back through there, and you know, there's flax and there's toi and all sorts of pittosporums and things that, you know, create a different sort of biodiversity. And the water storage, extra water storage that's around, they're doing that on farm there, and I think they should be able to do it a different way. They're harvesting when the rivers are in flood from the west coast, they harvest the water, and they've got that resilience now to invest and do well. So there's more understanding about a whole lot of other things that are going on there. They now know about the lungfish and the mudfish and so on that are there in some of the drains and so on. It was a matter of just being educated and going and having a look and understanding, and then go, oh, okay, well, that's cool. I can look after that, fence that piece off, whatever, no big deal. So those sorts of things are the things that farmers are doing alongside being productive that you don't hear about. And because farmers are so conservative, we don't put our hands up on this stuff either. We're our own worst enemy at some of this when it comes to what we've got on our farms and how cool it is. And the coast, we're especially bad at it. We've got all sorts of inanga, you know, the native whitebait, growing up into quite big specimens, and wekas and fernbirds, and some areas there's kiwi and all sorts of stuff. You've got a lot of kiwi up around on farms out here too in the Gulf. It's amazing what you've got on farms out here. but they're frightened to put their hand up and own up to it. They often just enjoy them quietly to themselves because they're worried that someone will go, well, you can't be farming this land anymore. And they miss the point that actually they're there because they are farming the land and they've looked after it. And so that sort of frustrates farmers a wee bit too. So they just keep quiet, and you don't get to hear those good environmental stories. But yeah, back to the old irrigation and what it's done for Canterbury. One of the big things that has come out of the COVID stuff and understanding what needs to drive New Zealand forward and knowing that we're a pretty safe bet as farmers. Some of the extra knowledge about how much money gets left on the table with free trade agreements is quite an interesting conversation. And there's $10 billion alone. If we could get a clean free trade agreement in a few places worldwide, $10 billion more would come into dairy, let alone anything else. So there's a lot of restrictions that make it pretty hard for us to get the true value for our products. But yeah, irrigation again. That's the other one that, as I said before, there's common themes that when you go around the world, issues that farmers face. And I was lucky enough to go to a climate smart agriculture conference in October last year in Bali. And so farmers from around the world, facilitators from around the world were gathering there about ways to get technology out to farmers so they could actually be more resilient to climate change and adapt and also mitigate their greenhouse gases. And there was only a handful of farmers there. I was one of them, and it was World Farmers organisation that sent me. I had to run a facilitator panel, and it was 3 women farmers from around the world, and they talked about what crops and what technology they could use to do better, because they're hand-to-mouth farmers. And they've actually got smartphones and connectivity, better than a lot of our farmers, and so they were able to get weather information, and they'd plant 2 weeks later or 2 weeks earlier, depending on when the monsoons were coming, and a whole lot of stuff to help them lift the bar for their own families, and it worked really great. One of the questions I asked one of them, or all of them actually, but it really was quite had an effect on everybody in the audience. I said, so what happens when the crops fail? What happens to you and your family if the crops fail? And this lady just burst into tears, and she said, that's when we sell the cows. They all have like 5 or 6 cows to eat the green feed fodder that's on the piece of the maize that a human can't eat, they eat that. And the vegetable matter that the human can't eat, they eat that. And they collect the manure and they put it on the plants, and they ladle water on it as well, and they grow the next year's crop. And they said, yeah, she said, that's when we sell the cows. And that gives us 3 things. It gives us seed for next year, gives us food for now, and education for my children. And I thought, man, that was biblical. That was the cash cow. And so those small holding farmers around the world, most of them have some sort of livestock on their properties that are part of the system, the ecology of their farm. That's where it gets interesting. You see terraced land, you see beautiful photos of farmers doing terraces, and they'll have a bullock to help them plant those rice paddies, etc. But when you hear the stories about plant protein and that we can feed the world without livestock, I disagree completely. Those areas of land that those farmers farm in part of New Zealand where a sheep and beef land is, the sheep and beef land in New Zealand, only 8% of that is flat. And of that 8%, 6% of it is already in crop. So the people who are not farmers, who are developing these systems and talking about farm system change and food system change and saying we've got to go towards more plant protein, they've missed the point about the fact that the world's terrain, 2/3 of it cannot have a combine harvester go over it. It can only have a 4-legged drive, 4-wheel drive, 4-leg drive animal harvester that will eat the grass and turn it into nice, good protein for humans to be able to eat. So there's a lot of, and I mean, there's some of that agenda is from genuine people who think that plant protein has a place and that it's going to be a good source of protein going forward as we have a growing population. That's fine. But some of it is from very strict vegan conversations who don't believe you should have animals in production. So we have some fundamental disagreements there with some of that stuff. interesting about, looking at the New Zealand system, we forget how unique it is and how amazing it is because it's out our door and it's on our doorstep and it's always been there. And we've always done grass fed and we've actually always rotational grazed since the Second World War. We've developed that technology. The rest of the world's embracing that now and they're calling it regenerative farming. And a whole range of other things, and they're marketing grass-fed beef and milk and so on. And because it's been so fundamentally normal for us, we haven't realised how exquisite it is. And we've sort of missed a bit of a marketing opportunity there. We're catching up, but we're having the narrative taken away from us, which is really sad because we do have the best produce in the world in that regard, and it's high in omega-3 and done to great standards because our farmers have the highest animal welfare standards. We have the lowest antibiotic use in animals, and we have the safest food in the world. And we market some parts of that really well, and other parts we've missed a little bit, which is a shame. As an example, last year I went to the Animal Welfare Conference in Paris, and again WFO sent me over. I said, "Oh look, I don't want to go there. You guys, you've got someone based here in France who's a farmer. Why isn't he going? Why am I going to that?" Well, you're the large animal farmer. What are you talking about? We've got this board of 6, one representative from each continent, apart from Antarctica. They don't farm penguins, so we don't have anyone there. I said, "What do you mean I'm the large farmer? The large animal farmer?" I said, "Well, I grow meat, but it's rabbits, and I grow meat, but it's goats, and I do cockerels. And I do eucalyptus for firewood, and I do light cheese, and I do cashew nuts, and there was all this range of stuff that everyone was growing, all these farmers were doing. And because I'm so Kiwiified, I just had presumed that all of them would have had a lot more livestock as well, or that would be the base, and you do something on the side, but clearly not. So that was really, really useful and good. Seeing things like aquaculture, that has to double by 2030 to meet demand for protein from fish in the world. And with the growing population, we're looking at all these ways to do stuff. That might be opportunities for Kiwi farmers as well. There was a really interesting piece on all the diseases that are going around the world in animals. And of course, the African swine fever was huge and where that was going. And that's what has lifted meat production, meat prices for New Zealand, is the fact that China and other places suffer with that and had to euthanise so many of their pigs. Denmark is building a wall. I'm not sure if they've finished it yet. Yes, Denmark's building a wall, and it's not for the Mexicans like Donald Trump. It's actually to keep wild boars out off the boundaries coming through from Russia and places and through, from China. We're lucky we've got a moat around New Zealand. We don't have issues like that to deal with. I mean, we've seen now with COVID and Bovis had come in for us before that, but it is a lot easier when you've got to protect water than when you've got the farm over the boundary. Is actually a whole other country with a whole set of standards that are quite different. So we're very lucky in a lot of regard. It's another thing that we just don't realise how lucky we are in New Zealand in that regard for our farmers. So I've been lucky enough to speak to the Food Security Council in Rome, and that was one of the first places that that awareness of how much other people are having the lives of farmers in their hand and not including them in the conversations. I knew that about New Zealand, as I say, with my RMA experience and wanting to get involved with feds so I could be in conversations that were going to affect us, but it's a worldwide thing. Been very, very lucky to be able to do that and talk to the issues that farmers have. Because there is a lot of talk around transforming food systems right around the world at the moment, and we're not at those tables, or we weren't, but we are now. I think people get carried away with what transformation of the farm or the food system looks like too, and it could be lots of little things we do, but some people think it's massive change, and it is that swing: get rid of animals and get into plants and so on. And it doesn't. I don't believe it has to be that at all. It's doing a lot more little things a little bit better, and we've made a massive difference to the emissions and so on that come out of our farms. And so we do a lot of work on that sort of thing at Feds, really. That's why we get involved into the policy so deep, to try and get that sorted. When I was at one of those conversations, there was one of the person in the audience like this and hopped up and said there were some graphs about greenhouse gases, and they said, right, that graph shows that cattle should be gone because they are a huge contributor to greenhouse gases. And someone said, yeah, but the methane cycle in cattle is circular in agriculture, so it's not as bad as it looks. But if you just take it on a level like that, it can look bad. But they said, but again, the value of animal nutrition to children, if you're in Ghana and you get 3 kilograms of animal protein a year, you need more, and you need quite a lot more so you can have a good life. But in the West, in our diet, yes, you can probably cut a little bit out and it wouldn't hurt you. But we've got to make sure the messaging is right around nutrition so that people don't take that good nutrition away from their children. What's right for an adult and a child are two different things. But one of the big things that New Zealand agriculture can do to help the world and greenhouse gases and all sorts of things like that is actually to transfer some of our tech, some of the ways we farm, some of our systems, which is what the world is starting to do now with rotational grazing and the regenerative farming you've probably heard about. They are, instead of leaving all their stock out on the plains and ranches in Montana and places, or in the outback of Australia, they're condensing them down a little bit so they eat that bit off, then go to a new paddock, which is what we do. We send the cows from one paddock to another when it's eaten, and it gets a rest time, and then it keeps growing really, really well. And then you don't strip it out completely, so and it works. They're reforesting parts of Africa through using this technology as well, which is absolutely amazing. You see the before and after shots where it was barren because everything was stripped. The goats had stripped it all as high as they could. And then when you control graze them, suddenly there's green plants coming back, and it makes their water cycle better and a whole lot of things. So it's quite amazing. But yeah, that's the problem. We really haven't got over the years how good Kiwis are at food production, lowest footprint in all the categories, whether it's animal welfare, nutrient loss, carbon emissions, and we continue to get better at it at every opportunity. Yeah, and then there's the lowest antibiotic use, as I said before, and the way we do it with grass fed as well. But others are catching up, and they're learning, and they will try to catch up. But as I said before, for the good of the planet in those conversations around greenhouse gases, it's important we help share the love. But it's important that we continue to get better. And there's a couple of ways we need to do that. Connectivity, that's one of the keys. It's just so desperately needed. We've got areas and valleys that have got no connectivity or very poor connectivity. And so the innovation that our Kiwi farmers have always had gets held up. You know, it was Kiwis that, well, Gallagher's down the road invented the electric fence, you know, and that's something that we had to help with the world. They were going to put rules in about how high you could put it, make an electric shock. And Bill and so on, they said, hang on a minute, and we got involved with that as well, way back, I believe. So you can't put a limit on that. No, you need to, because someone can get hurt with that. You've got to dumb it down a bit. Well, hang on, what about bulls and stuff? They need to be controlled. Oh, okay. So actually, and what about the guys in Africa that are trying to keep elephants out, or in zoos where they're keeping elephants in? Like, oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, no, that's okay. Well, yeah, you guys know what you're doing. You carry on. So, well-meaning idea, but the intentions, the unintended consequences would have been horrific. But yeah, for connectivity, for being able to put all my data in one place, and I can pull it out and seamlessly get it through to MPI would be great, because at the moment I have got some of these systems and other guys can't use them, but I have got them. And sadly, the systems aren't integrated enough. MPI asked me to write it out and give it to them, or assure quality for my audits for my farm system on paper. It's like, hang on, it's in the computer, you can get it all out. No, handwrite it out, which is absolutely ridiculous. So we're holding ourselves back in that area, and there's one real sensitive area that, you know, you're either going to get up and walk out or go, yeah, okay, that makes sense. And it's about the future and gene editing. And there's a difference there between gene modification, the transgenics versus the editing. And I'm only talking about the the whole fact that we don't understand it properly as a population, and we need a really good debate about it without emotion. It would be really useful. I'm talking about I want to turn the horns off on my calves so I don't have to take them off. That would be really nice. What if I could do the grass that doesn't need as much fur, doesn't need any chemical sprays, you know, for grains and that you wouldn't have to use chemicals on farm. What about if we could turn off carry dieback and then grow a whole heap of new seedlings to put out there and actually save that species, because it's not pretty. You guys can't go into some of your forests around here at the moment, which is a little bit interesting, because actually the pigs and the other things that are in the forest are wandering around spreading the soil and spreading the problem, but you can't go and walk in there and enjoy it. So there's some of these stuff that we turn our back on at our peril. What about if we could turn off the wilding pines and a few things like that, and the other predators that are in the forest? So that's some interesting technology that I think we should look at exploring it, because it could be a massive leap forward for agriculture. And I know there's marketing guys that don't like it, but some species can live side by side, and a GE ryegrass is not going to affect an apple beside it, so you can still market. They do it overseas. They have GE farms in NOM, and there's no problem. And I'll just touch on farmer confidence before I open up for some questions. And I think it's a real issue for us. And before COVID came along, and they've done some surveys and seen that actually people are taking a little bit more notice of farming in a good light versus seeing all the bad stuff. Farmers, we only see when there's an article that comes out that points out something that's gone wrong on a farm, or something about nutrients that's portrayed in a bad light. We take that personally when we see it in mainstream. It's something about our psyche. No one can tell you what it is, but we're built a bit different. Well, we have to be, because we're willing to go and try and grow food for people. We don't know what rain we're going to get. We don't know what price we're going to get, and we don't know what reception we're going to get. We must be a bit nutty. And we really struggle to get our good stories into mainstream media, where we are doing those good things around a lake. And the Lake Rotorua farmers that had nutrient issues with the lake, with nitrogen, so they got off their chuffs and they invented new technology. There's a thing called Mr. Spiky that they use, which goes around the paddock after the cows have been in, and it's got an eye that can tell where a cow's done wheeze, and it puts a chemical on to stop the nitrogen from going down and getting into the soil profile, and does it in a released fashion versus all straight through. And they've also developed a lot of weirs and systems where you can hold water on a farm for a while, for 2 or 3 days after heavy rain, gets all the sediment to settle, and then you let the water go, so you've captured the phosphorus runoff. So they got into all this stuff, looking for solutions when they got told that they were hurting the lake, and sorted it out, and they reached the trophic level index, the measure the regional council uses for water quality, before the rule had even come in, that's now hammering them shortly, about where they have to get to and what they have to do. They'd already reduced the nutrient flow through the system, which was fabulous. But we see all the innovation, and because we get weekly magazines and online, and we see all that stuff that's out there for us, and it's really cool. And we end up scratching our heads and go, well, why are we getting a hammering in the mainstream? We can't get it, and we struggle with that. Always drawing attention to what goes wrong and nothing about the good stuff. So it is an issue for us, and I've tried to push through before COVID that this time round we can't be a political football, because the confidence of farmers is shot, and it's running through to their kids. Kids don't want to be farmers and all this stuff. Right when we need the best young brains to come through to help us to produce food more successfully going forward with the even lower footprints, etc. So yeah, we do it well here in New Zealand growing food, and here that's something that's the message. We do it well, and all New Zealand needs to trust us, and we will continue to grow amazing, nutritious food to the best of our ability, given the tools and resources we have every day, because farmers feed families.
Wow. Look, thank you, Katie. What a great talk. And I loved how you went from, the history of multi-generational farming in Canterbury and how delicate the ecology of it is and how complex it is. And then took that all the way up to an international level where around the world farmers are farming to feed their families. And it's quite a lot harder for people in some parts of the world than it is for us in New Zealand. And then looking to the future. So I'm sure everyone will agree that was a really great opening. Now, what we normally do here is we get people to send in questions by email ahead of time. And then we try and see if there's a number of people that have sent basically the same question, we make sure those ones get asked. And so I wanted to ask, first of all, about water quality. Because that's a really big issue here. We have a big problem just in the Hobson Bay, only a couple of kilometres from here, with a lot of E. coli levels being very high. Of course, the Auckland Council has a pretty much blank check to emit, and I know that farmers don't have that. So, can you just run us through with the recent regulatory initiatives around the 3 and 5 metre fencing rules? What's the position of the Federated farmers on those regulations?
Yeah, those regulations are. We feel they still need some work. The government did listen when we had an incredible amount of farmers come out before, in the middle of lambing and calving actually, to go through what they meant for them in their region. And it was a little bit frustrating because we didn't actually get the answers we needed for our regions. It was a general New Zealand view, and it was a bit tough to decipher what the effects were going to be everywhere. But the message went back that farmers need some change in this, and so there was some change that was done. I'm still not sure that the 3 to 5 metre thing, well, they've said that if you've already done your fencing, you don't have to shift fences, because in that piece of legislation it said you would have to shift it over time. And they said you don't have to now. But the science around it is it will have an effect for E. coli in some instances, but for other nutrients, the distance you are away from a waterway is not so proven. In fact, the way systems work, it's sort of interesting. Where you're really intensive, you should obviously keep your animals away. And on the West Coast, we came up with a rule a different way many years ago. We said if you can't control your stock so that there is no conspicuous pugging or slumping, then you have to fence. But if you can, if they're just lightly grazing and they move off, then that's fine. Because actually the way things grow, you get grass grows up along a riverbank, and then over winter it dies, and then in spring you actually get a nutrient pulse as it all rots down and goes into the waterway. So ironically, the best thing to do would be to actually quickly nip it off and take it out as meat or as milk. Would make a lot of sense, but it is delicate and it needs to be managed. And yeah, it is about that extensive versus intensive in that regard. That's where we sit, and we actually think that with water policy generally, there does, and to be best effect, it should be regionally done, and it should be catchment by catchment basis, because not every catchment has the same issue. Where I am, nitrogen is not an issue on the West Coast, and it might be because of dilution, and it might be because of lower stocking rates, but it's certainly not an issue to our waterways. But sediment can be phosphorus. So phosphorus attaches to soil particles. That's how it gets into the waterway. So when you hear phosphorus, you know that it's soil and mud getting into the waterways. Actually, and you guys have got carp around here, haven't you, that does that sort of stuff for you, chews up the banks. So yeah, there's it's a real shame. A lot of the stuff, there is science and evidence there. The regulatory impacts haven't been done properly, which is going to be a bit of a shock going forward if farmers have to meet some of these limits that don't necessarily give the better outcomes for the water quality. The two are mismatched in our view, and that's where it's a real struggle. But yeah, data, science and evidence sometimes is ignored when there's political agendas, and it's a tough one when you've got coalition agreements. So we want good outcomes too for water. Don't get us wrong. Don't let anyone say to you the farmers are just kicking a can down the road. We want to make sure that the right decisions are made and you are solving a problem that is having a detrimental effect. If it's not having a detrimental effect, then is it that big of a problem? So it's not an easy one because it's a hiding to nothing for us. We can just get made to look bad because we say we disagree.
Thank you. I've got about 4 different questions that are variations on a theme, which are kind of would-be allies. People who have said that, self-described city dwellers who are asking, what can urban folks do to help make the case that farming is not all bad? As people say, they've shared LinkedIn posts, people who recommend more people should watch Country Calendar, and one person that suggests you should make a calendar. But I wonder if
awesome, I'll see them outside.
I wonder, but I wonder if you have any suggestions about what people can do if they may be, quite urban themselves, but they actually want to foster more understanding of what happens in the country.
Yeah, and that's a really good question and a really tough one. And I've mulled over this and asked a few others, and it's I love the idea of the calendar, and we did bring that up a few years ago actually, and there's always budgets constraints and all the rest of it, and you don't know how it will sell and all that, so it sort of went on the back burner. Years ago we did farm days, and now Fonterra does those, but for what actually people can do, I actually couldn't really come up with a great answer. Knowing if you know anyone in farming, try and support, give them the odd phone call. The thing is Andrew Hogarth, I put it around the board too, I said, wow, what's the answer to this one? And he came back to me and he said, well, actually, if there's a way that they can let farmers know that they don't all agree with the complete rhetoric that's out there about farming's bad, that would be good. So on your Facebook pages or whatever you do, try and connect with a farmer on there. And every now and again, the old, hey, good stuff. I enjoyed, actually, that's something we could probably do. Everyone go, you see pictures of food, but you could say, if you're doing a food picture, go, I really enjoyed this. I thank those farmers that grew it. That would be such a simple thing. And I tell you what, that would mean so much to people that you wouldn't believe how much a welling inside that would cause when someone who doesn't know or someone who's not a farmer says it. I've tried to actually get, and we'll keep working on it, but got hold of supermarkets before COVID, and then that got in the way, to see if we could get some pictures put up in the supermarkets down the produce aisle and the meat and the cheese aisle and so on of some families that grow the food, just to remind people it's actually people that are doing this. It doesn't just come out of that chiller, and it doesn't come out of that plastic, it comes off a farm somewhere. So they're really keen on doing that too, so that stuff will help as well.
I've got somebody here asking about NAIT, the National Animal Inventory Tracking. I think sorry.
National Animal Identification.
Sorry, tracing. Yes, okay, but I'm roughly in the right ballpark. And the question is asking why doesn't it work, or why has it taken so long? But I just thought I'd expand it out because we were having a discussion over lunch about this whole idea of tracing disease become a lot more relevant to a lot more people recently. And we were having a discussion if it'd be easier or harder to trace cows or people in the case of a pandemic. But it's true that the rural community has actually faced a version of the COVID crisis with Mycoplasma bovis over the last 2 years. And I just wondered if you could reflect on the parallels or the challenges with NAIT and the challenges that the Ministry of Health is facing right now.
Yeah, it's sort of interesting because like the animal tracing into the food chain, like at the freezing works or wherever, is really, really good. There's no problem there. We know if an animal's had a drench or any of those things that what couldn't go and be food, that is really well looked after on farm. There has been some issues through block to block, like farm block to farm block, tracing and getting that through the NAIT system. Often it's because we have another system for dairy farmers especially, which is the Minder system, or our dairy system of tracking our cows. So we already had a system set up all those years ago. So then NAIT came in, and then there was an audit done after a couple of years to see how it was going. And there were some gaps, and those gaps were about to be filled and educated as to how we could do better. And there was a change of CEO, and time went by, and next thing we had M. bovis. So there was a big gap in there where we got let down, everybody, by the system. It is getting better, it's getting fixed. But I wonder if we've already got a tracking system that's sort of already around, and it's probably not that well, but it's a bit like, well, it wouldn't be IRD, but it's it's sort of parallel in a way to something like that, but not quite that coarse. Because if you get that wrong, they're certainly on your case in a hurry, eh? But yeah, no, it is important that we get this ironed out, and it has come a long way, and it's getting better. So that's the most important part, is that we know how to fix it, and everyone's working their way to fix it, and it's happening really quickly. And yeah, I struggle to see how we got this COVID part so wrong, because we knew what was at stake and we knew what was supposed to happen. Well, everybody I talked to thought that everyone was going to get tested who was in in quarantine. And any animal that comes in or any process that goes through, there's stand down periods for a reason. So it is disappointing, isn't it, for all of us? Because none of us is going to go back into lockdown, are we? I don't think. What I've seen, I shouldn't have said that, but I think that's the feeling of the nation, is no one's going to go back.
It would be pretty clear there'd be no second lockdown on the West Coast from that.
We never bloody had it in the first place. And that's for real.
Just switching gears to trade, New Zealand farmers and federated farmers since the early 80s has been probably the most hardline pro-trade group in the world. And I think that's a great thing personally. But what is the state of trade today? I mean, there's been some real disappointment at the deal the EU has offered. And I was just saying, I had lunch with quite a large group of EU ambassadors just a couple of days ago, and I don't think they're going anywhere with that. On the other hand, the UK was sort of back in the market for a trade deal. Are you hopeful about the UK? Do you think that could have value to New Zealand farmers? And is there any point worrying about the EU?
Yeah, the EU, it would be great to be in there and get those premiums that are there. Was very disappointing, obviously, for everyone to see the way that came out, and was quite shocking, really, to see how poor it could have been. But it's one of those things where you want a good deal, you don't want a crap deal, to be fair. So how much time obviously we'll be pursuing it, and it's important, but I don't think we'll be just taking any old deal. And so, yeah, the UK is important, absolutely. They have 64 million people that get hungry as well, and we have food to offer, and we offset seasonally with their production. So it always has worked well, and that's why it would be good to get good agreements with US and the EU. Trade in itself is something that I've touched on earlier too, that New Zealanders actually need to get behind and understand it a bit better too. I think, a lot of us do understand how important it is, but I think that your average person on the street doesn't realise that they only have an iPhone and Netflix and all those things available because we have export dollars that come in. We're so small, we rely on it so much that it really needs to be part that's taught in school. But keeping ahead of the game for our produce and being wellness food, the nutritional value and all those other attributes I've talked about before of how good our food is, it should run itself off the shelves. But there's a piece that's hard in there, and the free trade stuff, from the conversations I've had with senators and different people and farmer policy people around the world who are involved with this stuff, they have this fear that New Zealand is going to send a tidal wave of milk or, meat if they do a good deal with us. And I've taken pains to explain to them that actually the land is full. We've got the Alps that run through the middle. We've got pine trees. We've got grapes. We've got grain lands. We've got dairy farms. We've got sheep farms. We've got kiwi fruit. We've got our hort areas. There is no more land. We do not have an outback that we can put water on and grow, a heap more produce. We don't have a pampas land that we can put a heap more cows on and send milk through. So allaying those fears for those people was very useful, and they've gone, oh wow, never have had it put quite like that to me, never thought about that. So I think there's some simple messaging that could help, but they are long fought fears because we are only 5 million and we can't eat everything. For other nations that domestically have high populations and don't export much compared to what we do. We look like we're king hitters, and actually, we're 2% of all the dairy production in the world, but we're 90% of what's traded in milk. So that's where it gets out of kilter. But if actually people stop and have a look at it, we're not the threat that they think we are, and they actually just get access to some really, really, really cool food.
I was just saying to Katie, I once asked the Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper how he felt about New Zealand dairy. He looked terrified. I've never seen. As Katie says, he needn't be. Just on this question, there's a group called 50 Shades of Green, which are nothing like what they sound like. Actually, they're concerned about the increasing trend of farmland, particularly sheep and beef farmland, being bought up and planted out with pine trees. And it's such a complex issue because on the one hand, I always start with private property rights. If someone wants to, sell their farm, and Cathay Pacific are dumb enough to pay you double the odds to plant trees on it, well, what's the problem? On the other hand, there's ecological problems that pine trees are a monoculture, they're not very good. And on the other hand, it seems to be doing a lot of damage to rural communities because, as people say, you start off with a thriving community and then you get a bunch of trees that someone comes and trims every 6 months, and none of the community that used to exist is there. But of course, the Feds always stood strongly for property rights. So I'd love to know how you guys have managed to navigate this entanglement over afforestation.
Yeah, and that is a really hard one because we do stand for property rights, and I often have to remind our farmers when they start to get on a bit of a tangent on this one, hang on a minute, when it's your day to retire and you want to sell, are you going to sell for what's right for everybody else or for what does the right thing for your bank balance? And they go dead silent real quick. So that it is a hard one, but it's difficult when there's incentives at the moment that are upsetting the market, if you like, for what people will do with their land. And subsidies, and so business stimulus to get jobs or get economies going is fine, but protectionist subsidies is somewhere we can't go. It's too dangerous, and sort of was looked at in a bill the other day, and they put a couple of words around it, and I'm still not convinced that that's been the right answer, but. You're right, that they not only, if you're the farm next door and the valley slowly ends up in trees around you, you have problems with shading, you have problems with pests, you have pigs and stuff that are in there, and deer and possums and all sorts of stuff, and noxious weeds that come through, let alone, if it's harvested, you're going to get slash, which is not so flash. We can learn to manage that stuff though, but at the moment it's been an issue. So it has been a real hard one. We keep talking about, and the government's picked it up and used it too, the right tree in the right place. So if you've got extensive land and you've got an area that's less productive for you, you might choose to do that and put it in, and that could work. But it's interesting, the farmers I talk to, there's some broadacre farmers, the beef guys and sheep guys that have lots of hectares that are keen on looking at the scheme and getting involved. There's farmers that are getting out that sell their farm. It's gone to trees in some areas. But then there's a lot of farmers with smaller holdings, like dairy farmers, that go, actually, I'm not interested in planting pines. I'll plant native, and I'll plant my riparian and native or some other area. I'll put a little corner aside, but I'm not ever interested in seeing it harvested. I might be able to do something else in it, whether it's manuka or something, and do some oil or some honey or whatever. But there's a real difference in farmer to farmer as to what they think about it and what they would like to do about it or how they would utilise it. But yeah, it's about the unintended consequences of these things. It just shows you when you jump into a market and throw something out there, it can come back and bite you. And I think that has happened. And the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment too, he said about offsetting trees or fossil fuels being allowed to offset with trees is ridiculous. It should be land-based and land-based. And the government chose to sort of ignore some of that advice as well. But it's something that the government said to us last week they're going to have to relook at. We also talked to them and warned them that wool's got done another dive, sadly, which is one of the best products we've got in New Zealand, by the way. It's insulated properties, it's fire retardant, it's biodegradable, and it absorbs carbon, and it's like, what? We can't sell it. We can't even give it away barely now. But yeah, so that's gone down. Meat goes up and down. If meat goes down again, there will be a big rush of more land that goes into trees, which is probably productive land that you don't get back, or it takes a long time, and it's not the same after it's had trees on it. We've got to be very careful in that space. I don't know what the answer is, but it needs to go back and not be something that was done on the back of a napkin as an election coalition job. It's got to have a lot of thought put into it and done properly.
Okay, I'll just take one more from the email questions, and then maybe one or two for the floor. We're going to wrap up before 3. The last one that was in the email was around the emissions trading scheme. And I think really the question they're getting at is what is the Fed's position on climate change policy? And it seems to me that regardless of what people think about the issue or what New Zealand should be doing, if we didn't do anything, then it would create trade problems. And when I met these Euro ambassadors the other day, the Dutch one thought we were trying to drown them. I promised we're not. But they care about it when it comes to trade. On the other hand, if we get too enthusiastic about climate change mitigation policies, we can end up with a whole lot of broke farmers and people drinking milk from another country that doesn't care as much. Very difficult to land that. I wonder what you think about it, and particularly around, are we treating methane intelligently? Because methane scientifically is very different. It behaves very differently from carbon dioxide. And New Zealand probably has more of an interest to get that science right than any other country.
Yeah, it's you did right. At least we've got methane, treated differently. We've got the separate gases part of the policy, which means it can be treated differently, which was useful. There are some issues with the way things are measured, and you can measure. We're done at the productive end. A lot of things are done at the consumptive end, like a car is done at the consumptive end. So you get to look at now, and that's what I'm looking at electric cars and so on, because what's your emissions coming out of your car as you drive it, and yet we're done on the other end of what's the emissions as you're putting it in and as you're having your animal grown, and at the consumer end, nothing. Doesn't make sense. And so none of the life cycle analysis is properly done. When you look at transport figures around the world compared to livestock figures, there's a bit of funny business that's gone on there. Now, that could be sorted, and that's okay. We still have emissions from our animals. We still have emissions from our production system. There's no doubt about that. And I have a milk tanker that comes up my drive, for every day for half a year and every other day for another 3 months. So we have emissions from our fossil fuel sources just like everyone else that we pay for too, by the way, on our energy. So the piece on the biological side, the cows, that's the tough bit. So we are doing a lot in that space where we can to mitigate that as much as we can. The difficulty we have is that we have metrics that are used to measure it that we don't think are the right ones to measure it fairly. And so it looks a lot worse than it is, because if you're in a static situation with your cow numbers, you're actually not adding any more warming to the situation. There's issues with that with trade around other countries that are developing, because they want to put on more growth and more cows or whatever, or just in general to grow more energy to make them get out to be developed versus undeveloped. And people say, oh, if we use that metric, then that'll hammer the third world countries. Well, I think we can make some headroom and some adjustment for them to catch up, because the sooner they catch up and get out of poverty, the growth rate of humans slows down. It's a known thing that when you develop, you don't breed as fast, and that's one of the issues we've got, is how do we feed everybody going forward? So I think we could be more sincere in looking at the bigger picture, and that would be useful. But we've got an agreement with the government now, a good faith, to this He Waka Iki Noa process, where we're going to continue to work on ways to mitigate greenhouse gases from our animals and employ all the technology we can to do that. But we may never find the magic bullets. I know we've found one around nitrogen now with cows, that produce less nitrogen in their urine, so that's good. That's not going out of the system. More things like that will come along, but whether we ever get a vaccine that helps, possibly not. There is some food additives out there you could do for your animals, but unfortunately they work well in a shed where cows are going and getting feed every couple of hours from, because they're housed. We don't do that, of course. We've got grass-fed animals, so we're hamstrung a little bit there. So, the numbers that work scientifically for the world, we stuck to. The data did say that if you could reduce your methane by 10% to 2050, you're pretty neutral. The number that's in there is 10% by 2030, which means it's going to hurt. There's only one way we can get there at the moment, and that's through reducing cow numbers. So that's a hard one. And don't forget, we've got the smallest footprint of greenhouse gases from animal production, per kilogram of milk solids or meat or lamb, whatever you want to do, than anywhere else. Other countries have said they will get to where we are. They've set that target, and they've got a 10 to 15 year time frame to get there, and that will get them to where we are today. So that's the bit that farmers get a bit upset about. They're trying to do their best. They've got limited tools in the toolbox, and that it's getting pushed on us that we'll be priced for it. So it's a bit of a tough one, but yeah, we're in this process in good faith, and we've said that pricing at the margin. So if someone's doing something a lot more intensive and knowingly has more emissions, then maybe going forward later on they could pay. But if you're doing everything that got all the tools in play that you can, and you can't get any more reduction, then that should be that's how it is. And don't forget, we've got biological biodiversity on our farm. 25% of beef farms have got native bush all over them still, etc., and a lot of dairy farms, and we're not allowed to capture any of that benefit. That goes into the New Zealand inventory somewhere. I don't know where, but we don't get any allowance for that. So you can do what they call nationally determined contribution stuff into the inventory of the world, and we wonder if we should be a bit more kind to ourselves there, because we are working on the stuff and everyone's genuine about it, but some things there's just nothing you can do about, and until you get the new tools, you're stuck. So to reduce our incomes, that stops us doing other good things on the farms as well. That might stop those dollars from going into someone might want to retire a bit more land or whatever. So we just got to watch out for the unintended consequences as well.
Okay, we're going to take two quick questions from the floor. We've got one a hand that was up earlier. So, ma'am, if you just give it to me succinctly, I'm going to paraphrase it.
Right. Antibiotics, that's becoming a great problem, and it's becoming a great problem for all the people here, because so many of the foods are containing antibiotics.
Okay, I think we got the gist of that, and we're going to have one here and one at the back. We're going to three play. Yep, sir.
So I just want to talk about the strategy Feds are taking on lobbying government on agricultural issues. I have a firm view of that, and worked in the field internationally for all my career, that agriculture has been under attack by various forces for many, many years in different forms: animal liberation, livestock farming, and now with climate change, it's a perfect storm. And it's from people who don't have science, who don't have any understanding, and have an ideological position. Is just general advocacy the right way to do it? Lobbying, trying to get the best outcome, or should there be a bit more aggression in how you go about it?
Okay, and John.
Yeah, one thing we hear a little bit about is suicide amongst farmers. Just wonder how big an issue that is and what is being done.
Okay, so just for the benefit of people watching on Facebook, we've had three questions from the floor. One is there too much use of antibiotics, and are they losing their effectiveness? Too much antibiotics in food, what should be done about it, or is it even a problem? Katie may disagree with the premise. The farming sector has been under attack around the world for a range of questions. When you're in a PR battle, you have two options. One is be nice and persuade people. The other is to go hard and tell them they're all full of it. And the gentleman on the floor is suggesting maybe it's time to take no more Mrs. Nice guy from Feds. And then the question at the back is someone's raised a very important issue. I was talking to a farmer at lunch who said that he's been farming for 32 years, and in that time he's had 4 people from his district suicide. So I think that I might have actually answered the question, is it a big issue? But very quickly, we're going to wrap up at 3.
So antibiotics are a problem in animal feed in parts of the world, and in New Zealand we have strict regulation about we're not allowed to use antibiotic growth hormones and things like that. We don't use them. We use them in the feed, that is. We use them on an individual animal when they need treatment, and we have the lowest rate in the world. But yet there are antibiotics that are getting out of the system, going to get off the shelf, and worldwide, there's been commitment from farmers to reduce that. We've got an antimicrobial policy at World Farmers Organisation as well to try and ramp that down, because it is a worry. It is a very big worry.
What about fowls?
Yeah, the most antibiotic use is poultry and pork in the world. Yes.
Should we be more? Should the feds be more aggressive on their enemies?
I agree with you. There has been a long, insidious build-up of agendas, and I sort of alluded to it earlier, of for various reasons why people don't want certain aspects of farming or whatever, and it's very unfortunate because it shows that disconnect again of, instead of trying to help and figure out a better way, you just quietly insidiously attack something and try and kill it. Well, we're going to be bloody hungry if they kill us all off eventually.
But it does come down to communication, and you have been failed by Fonterra because people have lost confidence in Fonterra and the performance of the company, and they are a big spokesman. Unfortunately, it's the first time I've ever heard from you, and you're leaving the Federated Farmers next week. It's tragic, you know.
Just in time, Chris, you almost missed out completely. I mean, you got to look on the bright side. But look, we're going to have to wrap this up because I've seen people start to trickle out, and we have been going for an hour and a half in total now since people first arrived. So I want to thank you, Katie. You've given 24 hours of your life to really be here for 2 hours. So thank you for traveling so far and presenting so fluently and in such a thought-provoking way. Thank you to everyone who's been watching on Facebook. Thank you to everybody who has come along to be here in person. I think this has been a really high-quality dialogue and exactly the sort of thing we need more of. And we just wish you safe travels. I don't know when your flight is, if you can hang around and talk to people, maybe not. But we'll be here. I'll be here for as long as you'd like to talk to me. I'll be waiting at the back if you've got any questions for me about this or other issues. So thank you again, everybody, and thank you, Katie.